Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Wednesday morning, January the 12th. I'm happy to be here. I'm just putting up the chat room right now, and I just had a little bit of trouble getting into my switchboard, and so I'm just a couple seconds late here. So, yeah, glad to be able to do these shows and continue on, and, hopefully everybody's getting something out of this. We're on for half an hour this morning. We're going to continue looking at an article called Why Do Adults Stay in Abusive Relationships from Catherine Patricelli, and that's from www.mentalhelp.net. And I just wanted to finish that article up and, just sort of move on from there. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And we'll get right into this. I'm going to actually pop the link into the chat room here to what we were talking about. So I always say this on every show. I'm not a counselor or therapist, and I'm just paying to do my own blog talk shows, and I just wanted to be one more voice. And so, I never really realized, I didn't know I'd be doing blog talk radio this long. I had no idea how many shows I'd be doing, and or who would be listening. So I appreciate everybody who's taken the time to listen to my shows, because I'm on like almost every day, and really I am on every day, and I've done like over 530 shows or something like that, and I really appreciate everybody who's taken the time to spend that time to listen to what I have to say. It really means a lot to me. I really had no idea, like back November 2009, how many shows I would be doing, and then so now it's over a year now that I've been doing Blog Talk Radio, a year and a few months. So I appreciate it, but you have to listen to my shows at your own discretion. And I'm talking about abuse, and it's a very sensitive subject, and a lot of people just might find it very uncomfortable. So if you are listening for the first time, or be sure and listen at your own discretion, because I don't sugarcoat it. I just tell it like it is, and the topics of abuse can bother people. It can trigger survivors. So if you're a survivor of child abuse, you want to be very careful what you're listening to anywhere. What you're watching on TV or what you're listening to, because things can trigger you, and you have to know what you're comfortable with and what you're able to handle, and know that you're in a safe enough place that you won't hurt yourself or somebody else. So everyone has to listen to my shows at your own discretion, because I am talking about the topics of abuse, and they are very touchy and very sensitive. And young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have someone's approval or permission to listen to my shows. And that's because I believe in protecting children at all times. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and we're fighting to save children's lives every day. We're all volunteers, and we're working extremely hard to get the word out and to promote education and awareness surrounding and regarding child abuse and child sexual exploitation, child sexual predators, and abuse of all types against children. And so you have the right to safety and protection. So you have to know how to keep yourself safe online, especially when there's a chat room. And I have a chat room here, and so you need to be very careful what you're doing. Know how to protect yourself in a chat room situation. And if you don't know how to do that, you should get onto some of those websites. Just type into your browser online safety for children or internet safety, things like this. And then it'll take you to websites that'll show you and teach you how to keep yourself safe online, right? It's so important. So young people under the age of 18, you have to have permission to listen to my shows. Thanks very much. So we'll get right into this topic here. Why do adults stay in abusive relationships? And I'm going to put the link in the chat room now, and we'll get right into this. So thanks for being here. I'm just having some coffee, waking up. And on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio, we changed our show times just in case people are interested in following me. We moved our show time 1 hour ahead, which means that my show times at night will change too. So if you look at my show page, I'll be changing all my evening shows 1 hour ahead of where they were. So instead of 9:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, my show is now going to be on at, it used to be on at 9:30. Now it's going to be on at 10:30. So 10:30 Mountain Standard Time. So it's bumped up 1 hour. So it's a little bit late for the people on the East Coast, because that would be 12:30 Eastern Standard Time, right? So it'll be 12:30 in the morning, 11:30 Central Standard Time, 10:30 my time, Mountain Standard Time, and then 9:30 Pacific Time, right? So thanks, everybody. We'll get right into this article here. Why do adults stay in abusive relationships? From Catherine Patricelli, MA, mentalhelp.net, www.mentalhelp.net. And she was saying, for many reasons, there's the adults stay in abusive relationships, and he said sometimes they just can't leave those relationships. You know what I mean? It's a complex issue, right? And that's the truth. Like my mom stayed in the relationship that she was in, and she had every opportunity to get out, and she stayed in this relationship with my father until the day she died, at the age of 68 years old, and she had every opportunity to get out. So people would say, well, why would she stay? You know, why do adults stay in abusive relationships, right? For years, I used to wonder that. I'd be like, why do they stay together? They hate each other. Well, they don't hate each other. Like, my parents didn't hate each other. They really, deep down inside their hearts, I don't think they really hated each other. They would have never stayed together. They loved each other, but they didn't. There was so much bad stuff that had happened, and so much abuse, and so much garbage that they had put on each other that they didn't have any room to backpedal. They couldn't really undo what had been done, and that's why I couldn't figure out why they would stay in that relationship. You know, because there was so much I don't know what you want to call it, like trouble under the bridge instead of water under the bridge. There was just so much in their past that was just absolutely horrific and horrible. It's unfortunate that they didn't pull together as a team when their marriage started to crumble, and you know, gather the kids around and say, look, we're going to get some help because our marriage is crumbling, and you know, it's spilling over to you guys. And this would have been my older siblings, right? It's unfortunate, you know, that they didn't do that when it first started happening. But see, my dad was mentally ill, and he still is, and he's going in for surgery today. And he had a stroke not too long ago, and he's having surgery today. And of course, my prayers are with him. You know what I mean? My dad knows that I love him. You know what I mean? He's a toxic person, and I'm staying away from him. He's very toxic, and this last year has just proven to me that his feelings for me have never changed. He doesn't have the ability to think of me any other way than he did when I was a teenager and I was a young kid. And so he doesn't know, he never has really known how to treat his children properly. You know what I mean? He just never did know how to be a good, loving father. He's mentally ill, right? And so he knows how to con people into thinking he's this great guy. But really deep down inside, he's very disturbed. And it's unfortunate that he didn't get help a long, long time ago for his mental illness, which was paranoia, schizophrenia, right? And other issues. Who knows what else he's got? But I wouldn't doubt some borderline personality stuff and some manic depressive stuff as well. So, you know, it's unfortunate because, you know, my mom also had mental illnesses too, because she was diagnosed at the time they were brought up on child abuse charges. My mom was manic depressive, which is today kind of known as bipolar. And so, you know, it's harsh. It's very, very harsh. My family suffered from that. And my parents didn't get any help, and they were paranoid, and they just wanted to continue living this kind of really backward and abusive lifestyle. And it's unfortunate because the kids paid the price for that. And so many people, you know, would sit back and look at that and think it was okay it was okay that my parents did what they did to us. But the courts didn't think so. They were brought up on abuse charges, and yet so many of my parents' friends that my parents knew when the abuse charges were laid on my parents still continued to support my parents and look the other way, right? And even encourage some of the abuse, you know what I mean? So that's the thing. People, you know, my parents were completely responsible for this mess, you know what I mean? And I'm glad that I know where to put the blame, right? So many of my siblings blamed themselves or blamed something else instead of really taking a look at where the blame should go, which was my parents, because they completely screwed up and did not get any help, you know, for themselves or for their children. And so, you know, adults who stay in abusive relationships, you can try to put the blame on whoever you want, but it ultimately is up to you. And so, you know, this whole issue of people staying in abusive relationships, it's like you have, you know, unless you're tied down to the basement with chains wrapped around you, and there's no hope of you getting hold of a blowtorch to get the chains off of you, to break through the chains, you know, then if you're not chained and you have an opportunity to get out of an abusive relationship, you really need to do it, because it clearly is your choice. It's your decision to make as an adult. Children can't help it. They're just stuck where they're stuck unless they run away, you know. But adults, you know, they have the choice to get out. But there's so much psychological stuff behind it. It's not even physical so much. It's psychological. The abuser just has people, whoever the abuser is in the family, whether it's the woman or the man, because women abuse too, they will have that other person, their victim, wrapped up so tight in their mind that all they have to do is change their mind. And that's exactly what happened in my parents' case. My dad changed my mom's mind. She just felt that she could never get out of this relationship and that she was stuck in it, and that's what abuse does. And so, make sure if you are in this situation, you get some help, right? I'll just read right from this page here. The second question, why do adults stay in abusive relationships, is also somewhat complex to understand. Partners in abusive relationships have varying reasons for remaining in them. A first layer for the reasons for staying in an abusive relationship is practical, even if they are not always rational. Some abused people feel they cannot leave their relationships because they are economically dependent on them. For instance, an abused stay-at-home mother may feel that she cannot leave her abusive relationship because if she did, she would have no way of providing for her children. So this is one of the issues. That's what happened with my mom. She was a stay-at-home mom. She had 5 children in the home when the abuse charges were laid. She could have got out even before that when there was 6 children or 7 children in the home. Right? Well, when I was born, my oldest sister was married and moved out, and so there would have at any time only been 6 children in the home. The thing is my mom used to think she actually told me later on in life that she used to consider leaving my dad, but that she was concerned that she wouldn't be able to provide for herself. Because before I was about 12, 13 years old, she wasn't working. I think she was doing some little part-time stuff from home, or I don't know. She was doing some little tiny part-time positions. She was mainly at home, and so I think she felt that she could never really make enough money to help herself out. But she didn't realize that had she got herself set up, she could have got some help, and she could have got some assistance, government assistance, right? And then it would all worked out, you know what I mean, at some point. So she kind of just stayed because she just felt she just couldn't leave. She would just, she would have been in so much better shape had she left, right? I mean, my God, she would have had a chance to have a good life. She would have had a chance to really feel good about herself and to, get away from the toxicity that my dad was always producing, which was because of his mental illness, right? And it's abuse, it's just ridiculous. So, she stayed for many reasons, but that was one of them. And here, Catherine Petrocelli says, other abused people stay because they believe that it is the proper thing to do, given their religious or cultural backgrounds. And that's very true. Many people feel like, well, I'm married for life. I'm married in God's eyes, I'm married to this person for eternity, forever. So they just feel that they can't leave. It's just their job or their duty to stay in these relationships. And, even if their partner is going to kill them, they'll still stay, right, because of their beliefs and cultural backgrounds. And, I mean, to me, that's ridiculous because, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual, and I just can't believe that a loving God would be angry at a person for trying to get away from an abusive relationship. I just don't buy into that. I don't believe that. And, it's like, I don't know. It's because abuse is wrong, right? So it's like, why would a loving God say, oh, well, you have to stay in this abusive relationship because, that's just the way it is. I just don't buy into that. And we all know what love is and what goodness is. We all know what compassion is and mercy is, except for people who are so psychologically ill that they can't feel those things because they have no ability to feel human, emotions and whatnot. There are people that are that sick, right? My dad is kind of like that, right? Those people, they're kind of excluded from that. But everybody else knows what love is and what it is to care about someone, how it is to treat somebody right. And yet we just allow people to abuse us and allow people to, that's completely wrong, and it will never be right, right? I don't care. I'll just keep speaking it out because this is absolutely ridiculous that people would think that this stuff is okay, because it's not. And they said some practicing Catholic people, for example, this is what Catherine Petrocelli says, believe that divorce is a bad thing to be avoided and to be avoided at all costs, right? They may be motivated to put up with a lot of spousal abuse because the alternative is to go against the teachings of the church. And still other abused people may rationalize staying in abusive relationships because they think it's the right thing to do for the children. And they might say to themselves, if it was just me, I'd leave this marriage, but my children will be better off coming from an intact home than from I'm just going to scroll down here, a divorced one. So lots of times people will say, well, I'm just staying in this marriage or this relationship for my children, right? Without realizing that the children are affected either way, whether you stay or whether you go. The children will be affected, and it depends on which way you want them to be affected. Like, do you want them to be around a lot of abuse, or would you rather see them, sort of struggling in other ways, but at least knowing that abuse is wrong and that they really should reach out and try to get a better life for themselves. I mean, my mom stayed in this relationship with my dad, this abusive nightmare of a marriage, and what my parents did was created a living hell for us. We were bombarded by their domestic violence and abuse, as well as physical abuse from them and verbal abuse and every other kind of abuse, just because they stayed together. Had they separated, I want to believe that my mom would have probably been a lot better off. And had we gone with my mom, I think things would have gone a lot better, because the main reason why she was abusing me and her other children was mainly because of her anger and frustration because of my dad. She was so at her wit's end. Like, she couldn't cope, she couldn't take anymore. She was manic depressive herself, right? And so everything was a crisis in our home. Every day was a crisis. Just waking up in the morning was a crisis. I mean, all we had to do was get up, and it was crisis time. You know what I mean? That's the kind of home life they provided for us. So I think they would have been so much better, either had we gone to live with my dad. I think it would have still even been better without that situation, right? So I don't know. I just think that people oftentimes think, well, we got to keep the family intact and stuff. It's better to keep the children, in a home with two parents, and not necessarily, because not when the abuse is that serious and there's a lot of violence and a lot of psychological, emotional damage as well going on, right? Because those kids will be affected. It will definitely affect their life. Even if they're not being abused, they will see it. They'll feel the tension in the home. They'll understand, and they'll know, what's happening, and they'll, whether it's the husband, who's the abuser in the situation, or whether it's the wife, or maybe it's both, right? In my parents' case, it was both, and they were both the abusers, and they were both not treating each other well at all. And so, it's hard to grow up like that, you know what I mean? And because there's just no hope. Our parents couldn't cope, and they never presented a situation of hope for us. So it was just all bad news all the time, and that's why our family was destroyed. Really, we were completely destroyed as a family, and my brothers just didn't do well with it. One of my brothers was murdered at the age of 19, so he doesn't count in the situation. But my other brother killed himself at the age of 33 after years and years of trying to kill himself, and he was a drug addict, a big-time drug addict, a cocaine head, and he never had a good life. He was just so screwed up from day one, and my other brother died of a drug overdose in a shelter here in Calgary at the age of 37. So I thought he was a little bit older than that, but he was actually 37 years old. So it's horrible, and never should have happened. You know what I mean? My parents should have got some help, and had my parents split up, and when the courts actually ordered them to get counseling, that's when they should have really clued in and said, hey, we need to get our kids some help here. We need to get ourselves some help. We need to get our children some help. But they didn't do it. And I think, some people, I kind of think it was selfishness. They wanted to be able to continue to blame each other for this horrible life that they had. You know what I mean? They were both abused. My parents were both abused as children, and they were not happy. Even when they got married, they weren't happy with life, and then their life just went sour. They had all these kids. My mom did not want all these kids, and my dad was mentally ill, so the whole thing, was absolutely a mess. You know what I mean? And so I would, if you're in an abusive situation, man, you make sure you get yourself help. And even if it's just to call and talk to somebody who can at least be a shoulder, you know what I mean? Somebody, from the domestic violence, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence and whatnot, they have hotlines and stuff that you can call and anonymously, and you can talk to people and, just get some tips and some help, right? Because it's just not a good thing to remain in an abusive relationship with no help, no support, And we know what's going on out here. We see the headlines, and we know what's happening. And I know so many people who have, themselves been in domestic violence situations, domestic abuse situations, and gotten themselves out, and their children too, which is great. I know lots of people actually who've been in that situation, and I also know others who stayed in it. And I also know somebody who was murdered. One of my friends was murdered in a domestic dispute by her partner, and horrible, absolutely horrible. So I've known all my life. I've known people in this situation. I grew up in this situation. So myself, I've never been involved in a domestic violence situation. Of my partners that I choose for myself, which is very few, but I've been with my sweetheart for 15 years, and he's a good man, and I set the boundaries. I told him about my past and my story, and I told him there's no way I'm going to take any abuse off you. So the door is there if you think you're going to start becoming abusive to me in any way, because I can't take it. I can't tolerate it anymore, right? Growing up like that, and then to allow myself to be re-victimized, forget it, right? So it's so important for people to realize that, you deserve to be treated with respect and decency like a human being. And that, if your partner is not going to try to get help and they've been abusive and they don't see what's going on and they don't see that they need to change because they're hurting you, it's because they don't care. It's because they want to hurt you, right? And so how long would a person want to suffer in that relationship? I was talking about this yesterday because my sister was married to a man for 12 years who was abusive. And here was my sister being abused as a child. All of us were abused in my home, let me tell you that. We all grew up in the same home. It was absolutely horrific. And she went on to marry this guy who seemed like this great guy. They got married, and he had mental problems too. The guy was abused himself as a child, right? So here's my sister and this guy going to repeat the same thing that my mom and dad did, because they were both abused as children and didn't get any help with their issues. So here they were, abusive towards each other, right? Mainly he was abusive towards her, but I think she was kind of involved in that too. But she finally clued in and divorced him, which was great, like 12 years later. And we were happy. I was so happy when she divorced him, because he was a bad man, right? And she finally got herself away from that relationship. And then, years later, ended up in another 7-year relationship with another guy who was abusing her psychologically. Not physically, but just very emotionally, psychologically abusive towards her, and a little bit of verbal abuse. So I told her, I said, what are you going to do? Allow yourself to stay in these abusive relationships for the rest of your life? I said, you need to put some boundaries down. My sister's 5 years older than me, and, she's a really good person. And, as much as I complain and gripe about her on the show, mainly my complaint about my sister is that she is not supporting me on my healing journey. And, she's a good person. Like, she's not a bad person. She just, for whatever reason, can't cope with all of this stuff, right? So two of my siblings, well, the only two siblings left, right, are both just refusing to acknowledge my healing journey, right? They just not getting involved. So that's fine. But the thing is she's a good person, doesn't deserve to be treated like that. And so I told her, I said, you need to learn to set some boundaries, man. You need to learn what you're going to allow, how you're going to allow someone to treat you. And not allow people to abuse you, right? Because that was the second relationship that she was in for years. One was 12 years, a marriage, and another was 7 years just going out with this guy, just seeing this guy. They never did move in together, thank God. But the thing is she stayed in this relationship again. So she was just kind of doing the same thing that my mom did. See, and I refused to do that. I was like, no, I'm not doing it, man. If somebody isn't going to treat me with respect and decency and common courtesy and not abuse me, then they're not going to be in my life. You know what I mean? As far as a relationship goes, forget it. So we have to be very careful that we don't allow ourselves to be re-victimized. It's so important. What else did she say? So she was saying, I'd leave this marriage, but my children will be better off coming from an intact home than from a divorced one. This is Catherine Patricelli's article here. And she says, this may not be a rational position to take in all cases. The children may be, in fact, far more damaged by staying in proximity to an abusive father than they would be by being raised by a single mother. And so that was what I was talking about. My mom should have left, because had my mom got out and taken her children with her, which we were kind of hoping that she would, even though she was my main abuser, I did not want to be brought up by my dad. That was my fear, was that my dad was going to kill my mother one of those times, because they would get so violent, so extremely violent. And I thought, one of these days, one of them's going to kill each other. It'll probably be my dad killing my mom, because my dad was always physically threatening all of our lives, right? So, but my mom was too, so they were both just very sick and twisted. But the thing is I figured one day while I was at school, I was going to get a call. My mom would be dead, And then I was going to have to be raised by this psychotic man because my dad was very mentally ill and absolutely out of his head, right? So I did not want to be raised by him. And so I was always concerned for my mom's health, right? Because, and just, her life. It was always kind of like, oh God, I hope mom's alive because when I get home, because I certainly don't want to be raised by my dad. He was a very sick man. But my mom was my main abuser, so that just tells you how sick. Like if my mom was my main abuser and I wanted to live with her, that just tells you how extremely sick my dad is, right? So people just have no idea, right? It's very hard for people to understand that kind of stuff. I did explain it in my book, if anybody's interested in getting it, A Life of Death, Redemption. That was my blog. I was writing a blog about a year and a half ago. And the blog got turned into a book, which is just awesome. And all the proceeds are going to Dream Catchers for Abused Children. I don't want the money for that book. And it was awesome to be able to get my story out, and especially to talk for my brothers. That's really what the aim of writing that story was, to get the story out for my brothers' sake, because my brothers died, and they died in shame, and they died in sadness, right? Just believing that my parents did not love them, and some of the episodes that happened just before they died was just absolutely horrific. That my parents, even in their adulthood, could still not love my brothers, and my parents couldn't love any of us, right? They didn't love us, and they would tell us to our face that they did not love their children, and that we were not wanted, and that they hated us, So here's my brothers, just so devastated, really, and for a long time I think they were thinking they were dealing with it okay, even though they were both drug addicts and having a lot of problems. And then at the end, they just died, these lonely, sad people, one from suicide, the other one from a drug overdose. So I really wanted to be their voice, because nobody knew how they grew up. Most people wouldn't have known how they grew up, except for people that did know the abuse was going on in the home, right? And so it was important for me to be their voice, because I thought, they went to their graves in shame and silence, and no one knew what was going on except for the courts, because my parents were brought up on charges. But the thing is so many people just thought my brothers were losers. Even family members would say, "Oh, your brothers were just losers. They were just drug addicts. They couldn't get their stuff together." And I'm like, well, if you had grown up in the same home they did, which I did, you would be able to see why it's extremely hard to pick up the pieces, why it's extremely hard to even want to stay alive, right? And if you go back and listen to about 2-3 weeks worth of my shows here, you'll have a really good idea of the type of atmosphere that my parents brought us up in, which was a daily barrage of how to kill yourself, right? It was extremely hard to actually stay alive, because we all knew how to kill ourselves, but we didn't know how to live. And so that's why I titled the book A Life of Death, the Redemption, because 4 years ago I began my healing journey, and that's the redemption, right? So I hope everybody will get a copy, and all the proceeds are going to Dream Catchers for Abused Children to continue the work, just to get the information out to people, whether it's pamphlets or, to keep the website going, just whatever, So that made me feel good to be able to do that. They didn't want me to do that, but I wanted to do that, so that was my choice. And they allowed it, so that's awesome. So they said that, however, regardless of the truth of any of these rationalizations, the belief that they are true is more powerful than whether or not they really are true. And that's the fact that if, people think, well, if I stay, the kids will be better off, right? Or if I stay, if I leave, I won't have money to be able to support myself. Many times people will stay in abusive relationships just because they have these ideas, right? And, excuse me, sometimes they say, like if you go to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the NCADV, or domesticviolence.org, you can get some great information on there about domestic violence and about the situations that surround it. So many people really don't have a clue, but if you do the reading on it, you can see that sometimes people do have to stay in the situations that they're in for, until they can get themselves a safety plan developed, right, and a way to make it so that they won't be killed if they leave, because so many women are killed, especially women, are killed when they try to leave a domestic violence situation. And so it's very important that you get that information and don't allow yourself, to be killed, right? Just go on those websites just type into your browser domestic violence, and you can pull up, however many websites with information on how to, get some help. It's very, very important, right? So make sure that you do that. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'll be back on tonight, Dreamcatchers Talk Radio at 9 o'clock p.m. Mountain Standard Time, and then my own show right after that at 10:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So take care of yourselves and have a great day, everybody. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.